discussed it other than I tell him what's in the news about it.
And what's his reaction? What does he say?
Go tell him that I need a pardon. Go tell him I deserve a pardon. That's what he said.
That's Diddy's lead defense attorney giving the exclusive to CBS Mornings. And get this, while Diddy faces a possible 20-year sentence, is he still planning a music comeback?
He said, well, he's going to be back in Madison Square Garden.
Doing what?
I guess being on stage, and I said, I'll be there.
It finally happened. After months of speculation, after years of whispers drowned in sealed files, after decades of walking untouched in the shadows of power, Diddy stood where no one thought he ever would, before a judge who didn't blink. And when the verdict dropped, it wasn't a sentence, it was a thunderclap, a shockwave that shattered the illusion of invincibility and left the room frozen in stunned silence.
5 years in prison. Trump pardons him. He's free to go. President Trump was asked about this a few months ago before the verdict. This was back in May. And he said when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know. He didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, see, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who was being mistreated, not Puff Daddy. And let me tell you, the idea of Trump pardoning Diddy is not getting a ton of love out there. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on X, Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser. MAGA is already upset over elites seeming to cover for each other. This would not help. GOP struggling with young female voters, most of whom will hate a Diddy pardon. And then you just had other random accounts like America First. What? He's actually considering this? Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately? It's looking like straight up sabotage at this point. There were other accounts that were not in favor of it, although there was this account, Milo, posted on X, Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy after the government, led by James Comey's daughter Maureen, simply lost interest in Diddy's guilt the moment they secured his tapes incriminating powerful Democrats. The prosecution was a shambles. The trial was a farce. Now, I want to talk about if this is really going to happen, how it would happen. Also, if it really depends on bail and sentencing, then what are we talking about? And I have somebody who not only has been following the Diddy case from the very beginning, not only is a renowned criminal defense attorney, but actually has obtained federal pardons from the president, including from Donald Trump. By the way, for his clients Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, those were maybe the most notable. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen. Bradford, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Now, before I even get into the pardon, okay, there was a bit of breaking news before we were going to come on. This is what I want to get your opinion on first. So Combs' defense team filed a memo in support of a motion for judgment of acquittal, or in the alternative, a motion for a new trial. And basically, I know you read through it, but basically the evidence, they would say, is insufficient to sustain that conviction. Their main arguments is really echoing what we've talked about a little bit when it came to the bail analysis, but that his prosecution, his conviction on these Mann Act prostitution charges is so unique. He wasn't profiting off of this business. All consenting adults were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking. They argued this isn't even prostitution per se, it's voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but he paid them for their time. Everybody was having a good time. He makes a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were typically videotaped so they could watch them later on. It's just amateur porn.
So devastating was the blow that even his loudest critics, the ones who had been chanting for justice all these years, stopped cold because no one expected this. No probation, no safe house arrest, no polished PR punishment. This was raw, merciless, unflinching justice. The courtroom air was heavy, still, as if holding its breath, because the judge's words weren't just about Diddy. They were a warning, a declaration that the shield of fame and fortune could finally fracture.
Pornography, and then finally makes the argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by people of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently, it might have been a handful of people were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from quote unquote pimping or getting these women across or men getting them across state lines. None of that was being done. This was all being done for entertainment purposes. So it's an interesting argument. I don't think this judge buys it. It might be interesting on an appeal, but I don't think the judge is going to give him a judgment of acquittal on those two counts based on the argument. Now, the more interesting argument to me, and it's their last argument for new trial, is that, listen, if you were just going to charge him with these two counts, which I originally said when I looked at all the evidence, and don't forget, I was getting calls during this trial from individuals that were telling me, hey, I have information that exonerates what they're saying against Sean Combs, essentially saying that Cassie and others were participating more than just having sex in a room. They were participating more than that. They were paying people. They were hiring people. They were sending me pictures even when Diddy wasn't around. They were asking me to come over even when Diddy wasn't around. These were what these witnesses were telling me, which is really Brady evidence. And I don't know if that was ever turned over. But the more interesting argument is that all these counts were charged. The only thing he was convicted of were the Mann Acts. And he probably wouldn't have been convicted of these Mann Acts, but for all this other stuff that came in to try and prove these counts that they could not prove and did not have a basis for bringing.
Let me just challenge you on that, because this is a jury who didn't find that there was sex trafficking. And I can't confirm that they found him guilty of the Mann Act because of the hotel video or anything else. I mean, it seems to me that they might have convicted him on that based on the travel records, the payment receipts, all about that. Not even necessarily allegations of violence. I mean, do you think that it was because of, let's say, the Intercontinental Hotel video that he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution?
4 years. The rumors came and went. Lawsuits fading, accusers silenced, headlines buried before they ever took root. He always emerged bigger, brighter, untouchable. But not this time. The evidence was a tidal wave, the testimonies cut deep, and when the judge's voice delivered the final blow, the world seemed to pause. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't performative. It was brutal. The legacy, the music, the wealth, all irrelevant now. What mattered was the wreckage, the pain, the truth finally dragged into the light, leaving even his harshest critics stunned.
And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they would say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago, but how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things that has come out of his incarceration is given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just, maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean.
This wasn't revenge. This was precise, deliberate, surgical. For once, the system had sharpened its blade, and it struck with full force. Diddy's swagger was gone, the smirk erased, the mask stripped away. What remained was a man staring into the abyss of everything he'd buried. For the first time, he looked like he understood. This was permanent. This was the end of the road. And beyond him, the shockwave spread. Executives, artists, insiders whispering to themselves, if Diddy can fall, who's next?
He's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we've talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. There were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later. It's amateur pornography. There's an argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, but would never have come in if this was merely a prosecution for the Mann Act violations. Specifically, we talk about the Intercontinental Hotel footage. But couldn't the counter argument be, if you look at the text messages and voice notes and the travel, hotel, the payment documentation, that these charges, the Mann Act charges, could have been proven based on that evidence alone and not anything else about racketeering or sex trafficking?
Well, I think that goes, I don't agree with that. I think that, as we argued in the papers, the government didn't really show that the purpose of the travel was to have sex for money, and that in fact all the testimony and a lot of the other evidence showed that the men were being paid for their time. But even if we were wrong about that one, we have a number of the other arguments that you mentioned that really aren't undermined by those records. So for instance, one of our main arguments is that this statute, which used to be called the White Slave Traffic Act, it has this long history, but even with this long history, it's never been applied to a case like this. The term prostitution in a lot of states doesn't include this conduct, even if someone's being paid. If the person making the payment is paying essentially to observe other people having sex, that's not prostitution. So we've got the First Amendment argument, as you mentioned, and the new trial argument. So all of those arguments, I think, are independent of, the issue you raised, which, but so we think we have a really strong motion. And so we're hoping the judge will agree. We'll see.
So just to be clear, I'll list out a couple of things that stood out to me when we were watching the trial. There was apparently this voice message that was played from Combs to Paul, right, one of the purported sex workers. Hit me up when you close. There was a voice message. Hey, Jess, I need to get him from Atlanta to here. Let me know. Hit me up. There was a message from, I think, Combs to Christina Courtroom. Can security bring me 5,000? There was another audio message to Jane. I sent you 15K, baby girl. There was another one to Frank Rodriguez. Frank, make sure that room is set up right. So in other words, you could look at this and say, and the argument is, even despite all that, it's paying people for their time. It's setting up, let's say, amateur pornography. What makes this not? Because it always seemed that those charges were relatively straightforward, transporting people for the purposes of sex work. You're saying the intent was not sex work. That just so happened, whatever happened, happened, but the intent wasn't there. Just want to clarify that point.
And now the world is watching. The headlines ignite, the media spirals, but the true story burns deeper. For the first time, one of hip-hop's untouchable giants has been dragged fully into accountability, real, undeniable history shifting. The sentence isn't just a punishment, it's a signal fire, lighting up the darkness of an industry built on silence, intimidation, and buried secrets. No more guaranteed safety. No more money buying freedom. The walls of power are trembling, and for Diddy, there's no entourage, no PR spin, just cold steel bars and endless time. And as the smoke settles, one question slices through the air like a blade. Who's next?